Hello, and welcome to Traveling Chopsticks, where we talk about the culture, food, and lifestyle of Asian Americans here in Milwaukee. Today we focus on the Southeast, from Hmong, Thai, or Laotian to Filipino cultures. There is just a fraction of many beautiful areas of the world which we out to explore. Milwaukee's hosts a variety of Southeastern cultures, prominent in popular restaurants or shared among local marketplaces. Today we discuss in detail about the history of Southeastern Asian American integration, how immigrants traveled from Laos, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian countries to build communities in the city and in the U.S., as well as exploring Asian traditions. As the newer generations become more Americanized, some aspects of their culture may be transformed into something new. Today we have an honorable guest to help us shed more light in these topics, Dr. Chia Vane, a professor of history from University of Milwaukee of Wisconsin. Thank you so much for joining with us.
Thank you for having me.
So why did you decide to study the culture and history of Southeastern Asian Americans?
Well, I want to begin by saying that I think I love to learn, and most people, I think, love to learn as well. But one of the reasons why my research has focused for the last 20-something years about Southeast Asian refugee resettlement is precisely because I think it's important to understand this huge flow of more than 1 million refugees from the Vietnam War who came to the United States. So I was interested in making sure that their stories would not be lost, that as the elder generation passed, that those migration histories are not lost. And also to really, in terms of culture, understanding our history, our traditions, and why it's important, right? That if we don't document these, then once the elders are gone, they'll be lost. So that's why I do what I do. And I think knowledge is very important. So I want to contribute to producing knowledge for myself, for future generations, so that they can understand our migration history here.
Oh, nice. How does Southeastern Asian immigrants come into Milwaukee? Give us your insight as the primary motivations of Southeastern immigrants that would come into Milwaukee.
Well, just to be clear, so Southeast Asia is a region that includes 11 different countries, okay? But the countries where many of the Southeast Asian Americans who live here now came here as a result of the Vietnam War. So you have Vietnamese refugees, you had Cambodian refugees, you have Laotian refugees, and Hmong, also from the country of Laos. So they came here as a result of that because of the war, and then after the war they were able to spend some time in refugee camps, and then they came to the United States legally as, you know, political migrants, or that's how we call it in migration studies. But if you think about Southeast Asia, you also know that we now have many refugees from what used to be Burma, but Myanmar now. We have Chin refugees, Karani, and Burmese refugees from that region as well. So Southeast Asia and many Thai individuals have come to this area. So Southeast Asians in this area is actually a pretty diverse community, but more focused on Hmong, Lao, and Vietnamese Americans. So they're here legally as political refugees. Without political refugees, without the Vietnam War, Southeast Asians would not be here.
What are some key elements of Southeastern Asian culture that is unnoticed or not given enough spotlight were traditions to America? Many things must be sacrificed when immigrants come here, and some that could be their culture.
Sure, well, culture means many different things, right? Culture is language, culture is food, ways of knowing, ways of living, ways of thinking, and how people interact with each other. So I think that as many cultures around the world, and then in Asian society in particular, the family, the community takes precedence over the individual. So I think a lot of Southeast Asian, especially second generation, come here and we become very Americanized. So we become much more individualistic than our cultures and traditions are. So that's one element, right? You have to be, when you go to school, you're taught to be, to speak up, to be an individual, to advocate for yourself. But for many Asian cultures and traditions is very much about respecting the elders and, they know best. But to succeed in American society, you have to speak up for yourself and you have to articulate and express your opinion. So it's a very different kind of experience that people have that I think are changing in many ways. But some people have been very good at balancing the two, right? And then I think another tradition is, again, the family is very important to a lot of Southeast Asian communities. But because we live in a society where people have to move, they can't all live in the same area. They move for jobs, they move for education. And so that's one way in which I think the family dynamics have changed a great deal too. We still have many families where multiple generations live together. But now you have many, many nuclear families where the children are working and they move away from their parents. So it's those kinds of things, I don't know if it's completely lost, but it's a different way of existing that Southeast Asians have become like other Americans. We're not that unique, right? Other immigrants that have come to this country in the past, after a generation or so, people move, or they relocate to other places, or many Southeast Asians actually live here in Milwaukee now, but they were initially resettled all over the country. So that's what refugee resettlement does. It sends people everywhere around the country. If they have a sponsor in Rhode Island, that's where they went. But after a while, this community here in Milwaukee was built by what we call in immigration studies chain migration, right? You have a few people who came here, they went to school, they find this a good place to live, despite all the issues we have in this city. They find it a pleasant place to be, and then they recruit other family and friends from other parts of the country. And so that's how they ended up here in Milwaukee.
The majority of Asian Americans here in Milwaukee is the Hmong communities. Was that the cause of international conflict with the U.S. or perhaps the interrelationships between the southeastern countries?
Well, it's a very long and complicated history, right? And so there weren't Hmong people migrating to the United States before the Vietnam War, or what other people call the Second Indochina War, or people in Asia call it the American War, right? So it is precisely for Hmong, the vast majority of Southeast Asians, as you said, in this area are Hmong, the state as a whole. As you know, in the West Coast and in the East Coast, the largest Asian populations are, Chinese, Asian Indians and Koreans, and Filipinos. But here in Wisconsin, the Hmong are the biggest single Asian group, right? So precisely because of the war and the relationship that Hmong people had during the war with the American military, that enabled them to come to this country because of political and military history. And so that's precisely why we are here in this community.
Food is a core element for most cultures. How has the element changed during the integration of Asian culture to the U.S.? Many immigrants first coming here were not able to access the ingredients that typically used in the comparison of their home overseas.
Sure. Food is so important, right? We all enjoy what is comfortable, and I think children, we eat what our parents eat. So I think a lot of refugee and immigrant families, the first generation, you typically, again, when I went to school, I would come home and my mother would make sticky rice, she would make Hmong food, right? And so that's what I grew up eating. But then when I was at school, children, we integrate a lot faster, right? Because we're always interacting with the larger society. So then you learn how to eat spaghetti or hamburgers and all kinds of other American food, which is also, a combination of many different foods. But in terms of your question about how it's changed, I think a lot has changed. And a lot was changing already before people migrated to this country. So what you see nowadays as Hmong egg roll, Vietnamese egg roll, or Thai egg roll, or Chinese egg roll, they're all a variation, and that's what cultures do, right? They interact with each other. So even before migrating to this country, people were borrowing from each other. You have Thai curry. Well, many different people make curry. But I think the most important part is that when people come to a country like the United States, which is very different. Even when Hmong people borrow from Lao culture, you know, papaya salad or things like that, they borrow from each other, but they call it their own, right? You know, Hmong mustard green. Well, it is a variation of other people's mustard green as well. But here in the United States, you're so right. There are many ingredients that people don't have, right? So they do what they can with what they have available to them. Like some of the earliest refugees, they didn't have access to these 100-pound rice, okay? Many Hmong families, you know, they have large families, so they couldn't survive on a small bag of Uncle Ben's rice from the grocery store. So many would go to Chicago, right, where there's already a Chinatown, and then they would buy rice there and they would bring it here. And eventually they started to have their own grocery stores, as you now see the Hmong Pong Savang Asian Market in 76th and Mill Road, and then you have the Hmong Town Market, but then you have Pacific Seafood with all kinds of smaller grocery stores, and then they began to have their own ingredients. But the very early refugees, actually, I have heard stories, right, of elders not being able to eat hamburgers, right, because, you know, they like to eat fresh meat, right, and they go to the store, it's all packaged, it's all containers, so it's very, very different. So, but I think a lot of elders did learn to eat some American food, but many, like for example, my father, he never had a hamburger. Right, he would just eat rice and meat, as he always loved in Laos.
How wonderful. What traditions were brought along from the East, and what has evolved?
Many different things. I think what I mentioned about language, you know, now many second generation, they look like me, they're Hmong, or they're Vietnamese, or they're Lao, but many young people don't speak the language anymore. So that's a kind of a loss of culture. But again, we are not unique. We're like other immigrants have experienced the same things, right? I think some of the things, as I mentioned about earlier, is that the family unit is not as strong as, you know, it was in the East, where people tend to live more concentrated near their family members. But here people are so dispersed. And so they get together just like other Americans during holidays. I think another big change is gender relations, right? For many communities, there were very, in all societies, but when I think about Hmong or many Southeast Asians who came from agrarian background, right? If they were farmers, if they, you know, they might have very defined roles for men and women, but then when you come to this country, everyone has to go to work. So women will enter the labor force. So a very different kind of family dynamic. So mothers are no longer, you know, in the home cooking and cleaning just for their children and taking care of their family, but they're also working a full-time job and then coming back and then taking care of their family. So gender relations, family dynamics, language, and many traditions that I think our communities, our Southeast Asian communities, have had to let go. Their religious practices, right? That this is a great country, right? We have freedom of religion, but at the same time, let me give you an example. Many Hmong who still practice animist traditions, you know, if they have a soul calling ceremony or if they have a carrying ceremony, well, they can't bring a cow into the house, right? So they might slaughter the cow at the farm and then do the ceremony at home. So those are dramatic changes. And then also the number of Southeast Asians that have converted to Christianity, so in terms of religion, that has been increasing a lot in recent years because it's a little bit easier sometimes for some people to go to church. And if they live in a community where they don't have family members, they don't have elders who know the traditions, then they can't practice it. So those are big changes for, I think, our communities.
What kind of identify did Southeastern Asian Americans make for themselves, or perhaps what was the place onto them? Other minorities, such as the Black or Hispanic communities, have their own struggles in America, trying to find or create a place of the comfort in society which was unfamiliar or unforgiving.
Sure. Well, in the early years when refugees cannot come to this country unless they have a sponsor, an American sponsor, right? So many churches sponsor Southeast Asian refugees. When they get here, refugees eventually are the ones who form organizations to help themselves. Many organizations that brought them here, they may not have language skills, and so eventually some of our communities here built their own nonprofit organizations, or they created churches, or what we call self-help organizations. So they would help each other with reading letters, helping to take people to get health care. So it was really helping each other to access all kinds of social services so that they can survive. So the community eventually then use their own social network, right? Where they, like for example, we have, well, technically, 18 clans. So people will form small groups to support each other. They would pool their resources together to start a business. And so that's how, and then you see a lot of, Vietnamese Americans doing the same thing, Lao Americans, or they would build a temple, like the Lao Buddhist temple, the Vietnamese temple, really using what they know, the structures in which they know, to build community. So it's a new kind of community because they don't all live in one block. They're all over the place. But that's how, like for example, St. Michael's Church. That's one of the organization that worked very hard to help Southeast Asian refugees, right? And, Wana, away the street, St. Michael's Church, I mean, they would have programs for Southeast Asians. So they helped them over the years. And then now St. Michael's Church, they help them with housing. And then now you have the Hmong, Lao, Catholic groups meeting there, and some of the Burmese or Karen who are here now, they worship at that church too. So that's what they do. They form their own smaller community within the larger community to make sense of their new lives. So helping each other to survive.
What is the difference between the Christianity church and with the temple? Like how it affects with the society?
Well, sure. Well, many people converted to Christianity, right? They started in Southeast Asia already. European missionaries as well as American missionaries have been going to that part of the world for a very long time. And so some people have converted over there, but because many churches in American society sponsor refugees, so when the refugees come, then many of them went to church with their sponsors. And then eventually they were converted to Christianity. And so the difference is that many still practice their animist traditions, like for example, Hmong, but many Lao, Vietnamese practice Buddhism. And so what's great is that they can, build their own temple here. So it's a different religious beliefs and the ways in which people believe in many, even animist traditions or Buddhism, people really believe in reincarnation, whereas many people convert to Christianity. And, it is just a different way in which they make sense of their new lives.
What is the difference between the culture gap in Asian Americans, the first generations of the Asians here in Milwaukee, as opposed to the older, more traditional generation immigrants?
Well, I think through my research and just my experience as a community member, is that again, we have elders who come to this country, and there's a very different distinction we need to make, right? Refugees often come because they have to. They're trying to escape all kinds of difficult conditions in their homeland. And so many elders, the refugee generation, like my parents and other grandparents, they come not because they wanted to come, but they were escaping persecution and political tensions in their homeland. So when they come, it's not really for themselves, right? They're trying to survive, and they bring their children to this country, but they get here, and their body is here, right? Their body is physically here, but their heart and their mind is back in the old country, because that's what they know, that's what they grew up with, and that's home to them. So it's harder for older people to integrate into U.S. society. So for the younger generation, and second or third generation now, is that again, for the people who came to this country as kids, like myself, right? You go to school, easy to integrate. But I think what happened is that for many refugees, the parents then, especially for those who don't read and write, this was a huge intergeneration problem in the 1980s, right? Where you have many elders who didn't know how to read and write, and then they have their young children who learned how to read and write in this country. So the children then became the interpreters for their parents. They became the voice, the advocate. They became the persons making decisions for their parents. So we had a lot of intergenerational tensions in the 1980s because of that. And then I think sometimes with a lot of children, refugee children and second generation, Southeast Asian Americans, is that then kids integrate so much. And they don't always integrate in very positive ways only. Many also integrate it into more difficult, situations. For example, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, many Southeast Asians were joining gangs, right? And so that became a very difficult time for families when parents didn't speak English and the kids skipped school and they would engage in all kinds of unhealthy behaviors. That became a huge, huge issue for Southeast Asians, not just here in Wisconsin, but all over the country, especially in the 1990s. That was huge. It's a little bit different now, but those are some of the issues that I think parents and they're becoming American, their Americanized children, the gaps were just sometimes oceans apart.
Has violence gained at all through Milwaukee that evolves with the Asian of the culture? Like, how did it affect with the society?
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, Southeast Asian youth, they're not immune to all the social problems in our society here, right? Interracial tensions, there were, in terms of Southeast Asians being in this particular community, a lot of refugees come. And because we don't have much at all, then we have to live in very challenging neighborhoods. So then many refugees lived among Americans who were very much struggling themselves. So they have very little. In poor communities, they have very little, and the refugees had even less. And so we were then competing for the same resources that other Americans who were living in poverty. So we became, a part of those communities. And so lots of tensions, kids are fighting for all kinds of ways to survive. And so here in Milwaukee, it's been very, challenging. There's been quite a bit of violent acts. And if you remember a few years ago, a Hmong couple was killed in their own home, right? And so if you can't even be safe in your own home, that's really difficult.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Many Asian Americans only speak their native language they lost living in Milwaukee or in American in general.
Well, I think it really depends, okay? There are, I came to the U.S. when I was 9 years old, but I still speak, Hmong, read and write. And then there are others who came younger and they don't speak any, they don't read and write. But it all kind of depends on the individual. What I see now at the university as a professor, I'm a historian. I teach, political, history. And so I don't teach Hmong language, but we offer a Hmong language class at UW-Milwaukee. So what I see, the trend is that many young people, when they're, as all kids, right? Growing up, people want to be different from their parents. They don't want to be like them. They don't want to be what we call FOB, like their parents. But when they get to college, right? And then they begin to, that is a really foundational time for young people in terms of their identity. And so then you have many young people wanting to learn about their history, wanting to learn how to speak Hmong and understand where their parents came from. They might take a class about the Vietnam War and they'll learn, oh, they've heard some stories from their parents, but they never really understood the political history. So then their interests are very interesting to me. They get to college, now they want to learn how to speak Hmong.
Wonderful facts. Well, that's all the time we have here for today. Thank you for joining us again, Dr. Vane. It has been a really pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching. We hope that you've been informed and entertained watching Traveling Chopsticks. The food, culture, and traditions of Southeast Asia is something that should be shared and highlighted in our city.